Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one-stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sophia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. Today we have Riley Bowman on the show. I'm so excited he's here. I met Riley at the Guardian conference in, oh my gosh, where was it located? I just slipped my brain.
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City, of course. Yes. This just a few months ago, not too long ago. It was an incredible experience. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm so thankful he's here to share his treasure trove of knowledge. So, Riley, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the pod.
Well, thanks for having me on. Yes, Riley Bowman. I'm the 2IC or second in command at Concealed Carry Inc. and our family of companies, which includes a number of brands. First of all, Concealed Carry Inc. Our main website is concealedcarry.com, and that's kind of where we got started. Was heavily in the concealed carry focused arena. Primarily initially doing concealed carry training through a network of instructors across the country. Then we added product sales, and that grew and overtook everything else. And so quickly our business became more product sale focused instead of only training. And then over the years, we've added brands like Range Tech Shot Timers would be one of the longer running ones that we've had. Mountain Man Medical for trauma kit and medical supplies. Barrel Block, which is a dry fire safety training device. And let's see, what else am I missing here? KSG Armory holsters, and which is our more recent acquisition, and we're thrilled with that one because we talked for years actually as concealedcarry.com. We're like, gosh, it would make sense to sell holsters on our website, and we started doing that and selling other
Yeah.
people's holsters. But we're like, it'd be great if we had our own brand of holsters too. Mostly from a
Yes.
profitability standpoint. So we had the opportunity to land in our lap to acquire KSG Armory, and that's actually where I spend more of my time than I expected these days, and just kind of overseeing the growth of that brand. And then I still do training all over the country. I do a number of classes per year. I teach at some training conferences. You mentioned the Guardian Conference, which is the conference that concealedcarry.com runs. But I also have taught like this last year, I taught at a Girl and a Gun National Conference. I taught at the Active Self-Protection National Conference. I've taught at a few other events here and there through the years. And then I like to try to get out and share my own personal curriculum through the Pistol Intelligence series of courses that I teach. And so, and then there's the competitive shooting side of things. It's like there's a lot I could touch on, Sophia.
Yes.
But I got started in competing in 3-gun back in 2016. Yeah, and a couple years later, decided to focus mostly on the pistol side. So I switched over to pretty much just competing in USPSA now, which I've enjoyed thoroughly, and I'm pretty passionate about it. I try to go to as many big matches as I can, shoot a couple of nationals each year, and I do respectably well there, and continually trying to get better at that as well. And that's honestly my passion is as an individual is shooting competitively, because I love how it pushes me to get better, and it's just fun to do as well. So, and it's nice that overall the stuff I learn from that and take from that, I think also benefits me professionally in my actual job as well. And so that's kind of fun and cool too. And then finally, I'm a husband, a father of 5 beautiful children, and they're constantly keeping me on my toes. So there you go. That's the Riley Bowman intro.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much. That was a great introduction. Very concise, but also just you're a man of many traits. So I'm so glad you're here because I don't think I've had anyone quite this balanced in the world of competitive shooting as well as concealed carry shooting. So I'm excited to get your perspective on the way those two worlds come together. I've read a little bit online, just doing my little research before the podcast episode about how you connect those worlds, but I'm excited for you to
Yeah.
say it kind of for the first time on She Shield. So I'd first like to start with what was your first experience with a firearm, and was it kind of from there that your journey began? You became interested in learning more and just couldn't get enough, or what's your story like?
I grew up in rural Idaho, and our family, meaning the extended family, grandpa, grandma, aunts, uncles, cousins, we liked guns. We went camping together. We did family reunions together. We shot guns together. Probably my earliest memory was 4 or 5 years old. And I just remember being at one of those family get-togethers and shooting a 22, and thinking that was. I mean, at that point, I was like, "Guns are awesome. I love guns."
Right.
And so thus began the love affair with firearms from an early age. But I was mostly casual about it. Just a average kind of American gun owner. Got into hunting as well in my teens, and it was just part of the lifestyle, but I wasn't super serious about it from, well, certainly not a competitive side. I didn't even know that kind of world existed until much later in my life. But concealed carry, that wasn't really a thing either, until when we learned that we were expecting our first child, my wife and I. That's kind of what became, this impetus to, oh, now there's this third individual that is completely helpless in my life that I have to be completely responsible for and taking care of, and making sure he stays safe and protected. And so that kind of started that in the back of my mind, and I gradually, kind of over the years. I mean, initially it was just well, let me go get a concealed carry permit, and that was a simple process in Idaho at the time. It's like just about anybody that pass a background check, you walk in and, okay, here's your permit, great, have a nice day.
Yeah.
And not knowing really a lot, I started packing a handgun around with me, and it wasn't until a number of years later I actually just kind of was like, hey, I think I'll become a firearm instructor, just on a whim, pretty much. Kind
Nice.
of silly. And again, a lot of Dunning-Kruger effect was strong with me. Didn't know a lot of things, but I thought I did. Uh, so I kind of struggled along my way, and eventually started finding good sources of information, good training for myself. Um, and then 7, 8 years ago, had the opportunity to. I was already teaching classes as a concealed carry instructor primarily, through the brand that we now, that I actually work for full time, and had the opportunity to join forces with my business partner Jacob and do this, full time as my actual job. And so that has afforded me a little bit of the time and opportunity to actually go even deeper into shooting, into concealed carry, and that's taken me a lot of places, skill wise and knowledge wise, and I'm still learning, still growing, still working on getting better. But in a nutshell, condensing like most of 40 years of life experience, that's how I ended up to where I am.
Wonderful. Yes, and I followed that very easily. That's so good to know, and I love that you started with, picking up the gun for the first time and then becoming curious and then kind of admitting to maybe feeling like you knew more than you did. I've been going through that a lot, still going through it a lot. As someone who has a social media account with people who are looking for advice, it's easy to kind of think I know more than I do. So I appreciate your vulnerability there and sharing that side of the journey. It's very important to, I think, discuss. I didn't really notice it until someone else said something about it in their journey. So I hope that touches someone today. Um, so where did you when did you initially start becoming curious about competitive shooting? Was it someone who influenced you or a class?
Yeah. It's been, let's see, it was probably 2011. So,
Okay.
wow, 12 years ago. I got into, and it was actually just kind of a friend of a friend mentioning something. And I learned about this part-time volunteer state level law enforcement agency here in Colorado, called the Colorado Rangers, which is a statewide law enforcement reserve. It's actually, to my knowledge, the only um, sworn with arresting powers state level reserve law enforcement agency in the country. And so I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I was kind of thinking at the time, like, hey, it's a volunteer opportunity. I'd love to find ways to give back to my community. Let's do that. So I became a Colorado Ranger, and as a statewide reserve, essentially we would support any of the other city, county, or state agencies anywhere in the state of Colorado, anytime we're called upon, just like any other reserve. Just most of the time, cities or counties might have reserves that they have for their own purposes, but they, could call upon the Rangers anytime, anywhere, and anywhere in the state. So I got involved in that. I learned. I remember going through our post academy, our training academy. That I was like, I am actually compared to. I don't. This sounds really bad, but I was like,
Go for it.
compared to a lot of my counterparts, I'm pretty skilled with the handgun. That which was surprising to me at the time. Like I just didn't. I had no reference. I had no,
Mm, yeah.
concept of like what good was. And like passing the qualification was easy for me. And I'd watch some of these fellow officers struggle at times with different things, and I was like, interesting. And, and
Right.
and then around that same time, I remember probably for the first time ever seeing like on YouTube, uh, whether it was three gun or USPSA. I don't remember what I came across first. Probably about the first time I learned of Jerry Michalek, and
Hmm.
people like that. So,
Hmm.
so I'm like starting to become aware of that competition world.
Yes.
But it wasn't until 2016 when um, somebody mentioned to me that there was this competition going on, and it was called American Marksman, which was going to be filmed for Outdoor Channel, and it was all about finding like the next crop of upcoming amateur competitive shooters. And like you couldn't be, you know, sponsored or professional in any sense of the word. And so I was like, well, I'm definitely none of that. So I'm an amateur. So you shot a kind of a qualifying course of fire that determined if you qualified for the regional championship or not. I qualified for that. I went to the
Okay.
regional championship, won that. That qualified me for nationals, which was held in Alabama in January 2017. And so I went to nationals and finished 10th, and was like, I'm kind of good at this competition thing. So let's do more of that. And so that's when it was actually the fall of 2016. I shot my first three gun match, and I did that for several seasons. And then, as I mentioned, I got into USPSA following that. And so that is the path right there. Is how I ended up there. It was a lot of it was kind of happenstance, kind of right place, right time, and and it just was interesting. Like even as I think back to it on it now, is like I remember when I won the regional championship. I mean, I was the top person overall. Period. Like I was like, I did not expect that. I'm like,
Okay.
how did this happen?
Right. Right.
I was
Yeah.
shocked. They
Yeah.
called
Of
my name
course.
in first place, and I hear my name, and I'm like, eh, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but that was also this like huge surge, like a boost of confidence because I had no concept, and all of a sudden I'm
Of
like,
course.
wow, okay,
Yeah.
uh, and I'd like to think that I was humble about it. I think so, but it was just this weird kind of realization, and I don't think if I had that little boost of confidence from that I would be where I am right now with competitive shooting. And I realize not everybody gets into it in that kind of way. And I know a lot of people hold back. And I would say I was in that, like, I probably really legit knew about, say, USPSA in probably 2013, 2014.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe I
Hmm.
should do that. But I had no clue of where to get started, where even matches were held, how to sign up. I knew nobody shooting that kind of thing. So I just, it was one of those things like, that'd be cool, but it was just in the
Hmm.
back of my mind.
Right.
And because of the American Marksman and because of that sudden boost of confidence, because of how that went for me, now I was like, okay, let's go seeking for this and let's get into this thing, officially as a competitive sport.
Right. No, that's incredible. Yeah, that would be I feel like shocking, especially in the beginning when you think the almost like the I don't know, the competition will be more difficult. Yeah, that would be hard to take on, I feel like right away, but that is really exciting. I'm glad it sparked an interest for you because you're now here today to be an example for everyone, and also how to connect that world to concealed carry, which is what I would like to talk about next. I'm just too excited to talk about this and hear this from you. So I want to jump into this. There of course, I know we talked about this a little bit at the Mounted Man Medical, the Guardian summit, but
Mhm.
there is this ongoing argument about competition shooting not being representative of concealed carry or even self-defense and just in general. So I would love for you to go ahead and speak to that again, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. So, uh, of course, those two, actually multiple worlds kind of exist really, because you kind of have like, I mean, really, if you want to get nitty gritty about it, you got, military, you got law enforcement, you got civilian self defense, kind of that crowd, I guess concealed carry, right? And then you got competition. And then it kind of gets well, somewhat grouped together in that a lot of the tactical sides, so say LE, military, um, tactical self defense folks, kind of one side, and then like the competition side, right?
Right.
Um, and like I get that, I see that, and I think at one point in my life, I probably would have been guilty of, oh, that competition stuff that'll get you killed in the streets, kind of attitude, and so where I'm at with it now is I think that there's certain skill sets like personal defense oriented skill sets that are applicable to the civilian, self defender, whoever, just a person that like that's their world is. That's what they care about is I want to be prepared to defend myself or my family or my community. Maybe it goes to that level. I don't know. We're all at different places and have different goals and motivations in mind. And then of course you got the military side or the law enforcement side, right? Um, that like I see. Um, yeah, actually, I lost my train of thought there. This isn't very. How often does this
This is
happen
great.
on a podcast for me, Sophia? Hardly,
Oh,
hardly ever
just
anymore.
never. But no, I'm just kidding. It's totally
But
fine.
yeah. So the well, what I was saying is
Yes,
that we got to put things in like specific contexts, right?
absolutely.
Like there's a
Yes.
context for everything.
Yes.
And what I see competition shooting as is the perfect demonstration of efficient shooting skills. Like that's what competition shooting is, because
Hmm.
like whether you're a USPSA competitor or IDPA or three gun, um, I guess unless it's a accuracy only endeavor. So certainly there's like bullseye focused, competition, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking like a practical shooting competition, right?
Right.
Um, those are the whole goal in those sports is shoot whatever thing as efficiently as possible within a certain, context of rules. But overall, like he or she who wins is he or she that was the most efficient at doing the thing, right?
Right.
And so it's the most pure demonstration of fast-paced shooting skill known to man, right? Now, on the tactical side or the self-defense side of the house, what groups everything together where they all kind of merge in one place is in the shooting discipline, right? But there's certain skills that are very specific and only apply to military use. There's certain things that only apply to law enforcement use. There's certain things that only apply to the civilian concealed carrier context. But what brings everything together is shooting skill, shooting ability, the ability to say, I need to put a round or multiple rounds on this specific target in as little time as possible,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So that's where I'm at with it today is to me competition shooting it's a game. That's all that is what it is if we're just being honest. I don't think of competition shooting as being preparation for the real world. I do not. I don't mix those. I don't that would be dishonest, I think, to be like, this is training for, the real world.
Right.
Uh, I actually think that IDPA, and I understand the desire for creating the organization in the first place and kind of where it came from. I think it was all a good thing. And frankly,
Hmm.
all practical shooting kind of came from this desire to create a a a world where we could practice practical shooting skills
Hmm.
that would benefit things on the self-defense or personal defense or tactical side. I mean, that is actually kind of where it all came from back in the 50s, 60s, 70s with leather slap matches in the old days, Jeff Cooper, um, Jack Weaver, all these names people would know that were real big into that thing at that time. They create IPSC, International Practical Shooting Confederation, I think in 1976, out of a desire to test techniques, skills, equipment, and stuff that they could then see what works and what doesn't work, and then bring that over into the tactical side. Like, well, this would be good for law enforcement officers to maybe look at using or doing or implementing. This would be good for concealed carriers, that kind of thing, right? So that's kind of where it all came from. But like IDPA kind of create a game that they then try to say is not really a game, because you got to
Mm-hmm.
have these shooting scenarios, and it's supposed to be defensive, like a defensive shooting context. And I get that, but it's still a game. So
Right.
let's make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we're I think honest with ourselves and not
Yeah.
confusing or saying that we're somehow gonna, you know, that we're preparing ourselves for the gunfight that we're gonna, find ourselves in at the gas station tomorrow because I'm shooting an
Right.
IDPA match today.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of it like that. I do think that the IDPA match or the USPSA match prepares me to be highly skilled from a shooting fundamentals and shooting skill standpoint. But it's not teaching me tactics. It's not teaching me situational awareness or any of
Right.
that kind of stuff. So those things I have to learn from somewhere else, from
Mm-hmm.
some other appropriate context. And so I think it's important that all these worlds get along together. They should, because
Mm-hmm.
again, they do have the commonality of shooting is involved,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that we should take the things. It's sort of like I think Bruce Lee had a statement or a quote that is something along the lines of, um, "Oh, how does it go?" The concept is you kind of you absorb all this information, this knowledge in, and then you basically keep what's good and discard what's not good is
Right.
basically the idea of the quote. I just can't think of, I don't want to try to butcher it, so that's the idea, is sort of like keep what's useful, discard what's not useful.
Right.
And I think that there's opportunities in all those different little competing interests of, again, tactical and self-defense and competition worlds. There's opportunities there for sure of, this is useful, this helps me here, I should keep and use that, and this stuff, now let's put that aside. And that's true. I mean, there's a lot of, like, if we're doing a Venn diagram, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
crossover, and so we want to make sure that we have the best, um, the best, I guess, tools at our disposal, skill wise and context and knowledge and experience wise.
Absolutely. That was beautifully said. Seriously, thank you so much. And I know you're used to being the host on a podcast, so how does it feel, really quick, to just like be interviewed after hosting so much? Or have you been on a lot of podcasts lately?
Oh, I've been on a number of, other people's shows over the years, and
Right.
I enjoy having the script flipped on me. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to not have to
Right?
be the one in charge.
Yes. I actually do understand that on a smaller scale, but yes, I totally get that. It's definitely good to have sympathy as well and have that flip so you know what your guests are going through as well. That's always fun to kind of be reminded of.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
lost my train of thought.
exactly.
What happened?
Right. The stakes are so low for you, right? You're not the host, you know. Sometimes I listen back to an episode that I'm of course hosting, and I'm like, man, I sound so stupid. Like, just because I can't get my words together. But when I'm a guest, I'm like, you know what, anything goes. So that's so funny.
Well, hey, when I first started doing the podcast thing, I'd listen to myself and I'm like, man, I am so dumb. I sound horrible. And you know what? I think that's still probably true. I just
No.
inoculated myself to it.
That's hilarious. No, definitely not true, but I do get that sentiment, and listening to myself and, myself just talk, and my voice is always, it never gets I never get used to it. So,
It
yes.
gets easier, I promise.
Okay, thank you. I believe you. So, kind of back to your point, I was kind of reflecting as you were explaining all of that. And I remember going to my first weapons based grappling class with Craig Douglas. And I just bought my Glock 19 and I went up from my Glock 43X thinking, okay, I need a bigger gun. So the 19 is perfect. And then I got to a place where I was like, oh, I don't necessarily need to carry a gun as big as a 19, like all these, we live and learn. I
Mhm.
took this gun to this class. I had hardly ever shot. This was the first time I was shooting with a red dot. I was so nervous. I'd heard all these amazing things about Craig Douglas. And the first part of the morning, we went and shot for, I believe it was a 2 hour just range time before we moved on to weapons based entanglement. And I was so nervous and I was so kind of focused on my marksmanship and kind of almost proving myself because at the time I did consider my page a gun page, at least my journey through, concealed carry. And by the time we got to weapons based fighting and we put on the helmets and we went into what he calls the Thunderdome where everyone circles around, by the time we all started fighting, marksmanship mattered very little. And it was so eye-opening. I remember thinking, I need to just be a good shooter. I'm going to this class because I know grappling's important, but I didn't realize how important that was and weapons-based retention and or weapons retention and
Mhm.
all of that. So I then started kind of feeling like I had this big deficit in gun handling. So I got into USPSA, and now I'm starting to balance my training a little bit better with both as opposed to being super concentrated in one or the other. And so I'm starting to become more aware of that balance, but it's definitely hard to find when no one really talks about it, or you don't inquire, or just you don't have an instructor that stresses the importance of both. So I'm really glad you're here as an example to set that expectation of, competition shooting isn't everything, but neither is just owning a gun and carrying it, and maybe even knowing some jujitsu. That's also not everything. So is that kind of, would you agree with that summary almost?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean, here's what I would say in response to that, and just kind of, I mean, we can absolutely continue talking about this topic. I'm good with that 100%. But to sort of put a, a, I guess my own summary to what I just said and what you just added as well. Um, One of the things I think from a professional standpoint and a concealed carrier and a father and a husband that's passionate about protecting myself and my family, that kind of drove me to get more and more and more into the competitive shooting side was what I saw was something I desired. And I saw, and some of it was actually seeing other, because understand that I was still a law enforcement officer at the time. I'm not. I got out a few years back because the schedule got too crazy and hectic to continue that lifestyle as well.
Right.
But for about 8.5 years, that was, I was volunteer part-time cop and, doing all these other things too. And I continued getting, excuse me, into competitive shooting because I'd see, other cops that were into competitive shooting, and I was like, "Ooh, that guy's like," whether he was in the competition context or in a tactical context, I recognized he has a high degree of skill
Mm.
with when the problem calls for a gun. Uh, he could deliver, no questions asked, no problem whatsoever. And there was this realization that occurred, and I can't tell you exactly when that was, but I remember just one day kind of having this thought of, well, if what I basically recognized is if I pursued seriously competitive shooting, it would push my skill to a place where the shooting would occur more and more automatically.
Mm. Okay.
Okay, so the delivering of that skill just happens. I mean, the way I think of this, I think a good explanation or example is like, because most Americans are familiar with the concept of driving a car,
Mhm.
and I guess there's some in the more recent generations that are like, I don't really need that car thing, but most Americans see, the symbol of having a car and being able to drive one as, a symbol of freedom, and
Right.
you get to go and do all the things you want to whenever you want. I mean, that's so most of you are familiar with the idea of at some point you had to learn how to drive a car, and at one time you had to think your way through a bunch of sequences of actions to drive that car successfully and safely, right? And yeah, I mean, down to some very minute detail. We just went through this with my oldest son in the last year and a half, where drive driving education class, right? He goes through that. Then he's got to get all these hours, and mom and dad are driving with him all the time. He's got his,
Mhm.
learner's permit. Well, yeah, he's got his full fledged license, but I'm talking, 6, 10, 12 months ago. And, and seeing him go through that learning process was good for me, as an instructor, and just as a father to be reminded of, oh, that's how it probably was for me at one time as well. And there would be these little things I'd be like, whoa, why is this such a struggle? And I could see, all the gears in his head just just so much going on up there as he's trying to process all this information and process, taking that information, making decisions and turning into actions, right? And it's like, wow, and so, we all learn shooting much the same way, right? Like it's a pretty advanced technical skill, the act of taking a handgun, placing it in your hands, holding it a certain way, managing the recoil, being able to hold it steady while you press a trigger, not disrupt the shot. There's just so much going on there,
Mhm.
and it
Yeah.
takes a lot of repetitions for that to move from a place where you're thinking through each kind of step sequentially, more or less, to where, the gun becomes the hand, becomes the arm, becomes you, becomes your brain kind of thing, which is how driving becomes for most of us. There are definitely exceptions. I
Yeah, I was about
saw
to
one of
say
those on the road this morning,
most of us
but
is perfect. Yes.
but most of us, like, you don't think anymore about how much you press the gas pedal, or how much you press the brake, or how, what exact angle you got to turn the steering wheel. You probably don't even think about, if you actually use your turn signals, which you should, you probably don't think about, oh, I'm going to make a left turn, so I'm going to hit, the
Mhm.
left turn signal now. You just do it. Like, the car has basically become an extension of your brain, because
Mhm.
you're thinking, I want to go from point A to point B. How do I get there? And you just make the car do that as if you are the car, or the car is you. Um, and eventually we want the gun to basically become, and any other defensive tool for that matter. I mean,
Mhm.
if it's a knife, if it's a staff, a crowbar, like, it doesn't matter. Like, any
Right.
tool that we're going to use to defend ourselves with, the more that can just become an extension of me, to where instead of me having to think, oh, I want to shoot that thing right now. Oh, well, I need to bring the gun up, and, or, maybe I actually have to draw it from a holster first. Like, oh, how do I go about doing that? Like, you just want to get to a place where you just look at a point and you go, I'm going to make a bullet hole appear there.
Mhm.
Gun comes up, you aim,
Yeah.
you don't think about it, you just do it. Bam,
Mhm.
bullet hole appears. Cool, right? Like, that was the realization I had, was I want the shooting part of the process to become as automatic as possible, because then I knew, and I realized that then solving all of the way more complex things, the more, because shooting a gun is a more defined technical thing, but there's so many things in the self-defense world that are not that well defined, that are more nebulous, that are more, esoteric, that are more,
Mhm.
you know what I mean, right? Like, even just
Mhm.
talking about anything to do with managing unknown contacts or
Mhm.
situational awareness, like, that is not, like, yeah, there's some principles involved, but it is not a black and white perfect science, because it just isn't. There's too many variables, and it's other people get to make decisions and choices that I don't get to predict perfectly every time, and that, is going to throw a wrench into my plans. And so, um, that was basically the realization, was I want to push my shooting skill to a place where I don't have to think about it, because all that other stuff takes more brain processing power. And ultimately, I want those other skills too to become more and more automatic. Obviously, the more you practice, verbal de-escalation and communication skills, and, all that, and of course the hand-to-hand combative side too. I mean, like, the more and more and more of that you can make subconsciously competent for yourself, the better off you're going to be. But for me, yeah, shooting is where it's at, and so I've pushed myself to elevate that to a place of not always perfect automaticity, but dang near.
Absolutely. I Every time I hear about a situation, and it hasn't been very frequent, and it might just be because I'm not keeping up with it very much, but the situations where there's a mall shooter and someone
Mhm.
takes a shot from like 20 yards away, something crazy. And like it's not in that 0 to 5 foot range. It's actually
Yep.
quite far. Um, those are those are the times where I think, oh gosh, I'm so glad I do USPSA. Not that we even shoot that terribly far away, but you shoot enough where you have to have the skills to shoot even at close ranges in a pretty small box, depending on the stage and the setup. So when you hear of situations like that, do you have kind of the same? It's almost like validating. Like I'm glad I do what I do. Does that happen to you?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And I've had opportunities to participate in. I've even actually at one time ran force on force training.
Oh,
But I
nice.
love being on the participation side of it.
Hmm.
And that's where it is especially validating because force on force is. I mean, you mentioned Craig Douglas's class.
Hmm.
I imagine that was the ECQC class.
Yes.
Um, you know, that's some of those force on force simulations are about as close to the real thing as we can get without putting people's lives in actual jeopardy. And every time I've participated in something like that, um, this perspective that I've just shared, as far as you know pushing my shooting skill to a place of automaticity, it is absolutely reinforced in those force on force contexts. Because I mean, I remember doing, participating in a scenario, and I just remember getting done, and it went well for me, I would say, right? And I just remember like the adversary in that scenario, like he basically comes over and he's like, dude, like, he's like, I just couldn't get a shot in, like, and you just kept drilling. Like, he's like, it's like, come on, man, like, give me a break, you know, kind of thing. Like, it
Yeah.
was very clear that, like, I wasn't even thinking about what I just executed the thing. I just ran the,
Right.
the, the, the code, if you will. If you think of it from like a programming standpoint, like in my
Hmm.
brain, it was like, oh, here's the problem, here's the scenario, here's the context. Like, once I solved all of that piece, and it's like, deliver shots on target, that
Hmm.
becomes the output of all that calculation. It was like draw, bam, 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 and then like I'm going to keep doing that until he falls, stops, runs away, does something, that
Right.
stops threatening my life, essentially, right? And it was just, I was just executing the code,
Yeah.
and I get done, threat stopped, and he just comes over. He's like, man, like you basically just overwhelmed me,
Right.
with your hit your rounds on target. And I was like, wow, that's cool, because I wasn't even thinking of, like, I mean, I just was doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's good to know. I appreciate you sharing that perspective. And even I feel like maybe sometimes people just need to experience that too. And like those for experience it firsthand to kind of like feel that balance of I'm losing my words here now that we've talked about now that we've talked about losing a train of thought. It's
I
like
jinxed
it's
you.
hovering over me. You did. This is your fault. No, I'm just kidding. No, but seriously, thank you for sharing that perspective. I know that another thing you're particularly passionate about talking about is the kind of the gear versus training importance of like, is someone who has never shot better off with the best gear available, or is it really about their skill level? Is that something you would feel like talking about today on the podcast?
Sure. you know and of course, if there's an angle you want me to take, I'm all
No,
ears. But
just go for
because,
it.
okay, you're letting me
Yes,
loose. Oh boy.
please. Yes.
I apologize in advance.
I know.
No, but a while back I did a post on my social media. I did like this. It was just standard distribution graph, you know, where you kind of have this peak in the middle, right? And then one standard deviation and two standard deviations, whatever. You kind of see how that falls off. You hit a point of diminishing returns, whatever. And I posted that, and I kind of made this correlation to skill and kind of just where a lot of people are. And I thought that post led to a lot of good discussion. And some of what I was trying to communicate with that was how does the equipment that we use, the gear that we use, does it matter? Well, of course it does to some point.
Hmm.
Um, but what's interesting is kind of through a person's journey, initially, when you are brand spanking new, from and there's a lot of nuance to this, but when you're brand new, it almost doesn't matter what you use because you're just learning and
Mhm.
you suck. Like, just to be frank about it, like that's
Yeah.
just the truth. Like,
Like,
because
yep.
you're brand new to it. So
Mhm.
I could put a $5,000 custom gun. Actually, in today's prices, it's more like, to get a really good high end custom gun, it's more like $8,000. I could put an
Mhm.
$8,000 2011 in your hands with an optic and all the bells and whistles and trinkets, and I could put a $200, bottom of the barrel, name your cheap brand out there, pistol in your hand, and you probably still struggle to hit the broadside of a barn.
That's
you
fair.
know so
Absolutely. Yes.
so initially, like, the equipment doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
Now the nuance there is that there's definitely some pitfalls. Like, I just came across a social media post of a friend and a fellow instructor yesterday or the day before, and they were talking about kind of the classic. I mean, it's become classic. I see, this, I think, is becoming an accepted thought process,
Mhm.
which is, hey, husbands and boyfriends and men out there, stop telling your sweet old missus to go get themselves a 5-shot J-frame revolver for their first gun. Um, because unfortunately, that's been true for a
Right.
number of people. And she
Yes.
basically just talked about having, like, 3 students in her most recent class that had showed up with revolvers, and it being kind of a struggle fest. And
Yes.
it's like, yeah, yeah, so the nuance here is that, yeah, good equipment, or at least proper equipment for the individual, that facilitates the learning, that's key. That's for
Mhm.
sure. So we do need to recognize that. And the other side of this is that if particularly the person cares about um, using that equipment to save their life, like, it needs to work. It needs to be
Mhm.
reliable. If it's not reliable, if it doesn't function like when it's supposed to, how it's supposed to, we got a problem,
Right.
because now we set ourselves up for failure. Um, because you might need to draw that gun and use it to save your life today, and all of a sudden you get a click instead of a bang. That's a problem,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So, and being all like, well, I got 500 rounds through it and no problems, works for me. That's not good
Mhm.
enough, unfortunately.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
so the challenge here is we have folks, across a wide spectrum of skill and understanding, that we always need to be, we need to cater to as best we can. And that's not always easy because, a high level person and a low level skilled person, need different things at different times in their journey. But, I always, like to just say, hey, make sure you get something that is known for working, that it's reliable. And how do you know that? Well, there's some pretty good evidence out there of the things that work. Like you mentioned, I'll mention a specific brand here too, Glock. Hey,
Mhm.
pretty well known track record of performance over the
Yes.
last 4+ decades. Well, it's hard to go wrong with that. And it might not be the
Yes.
the sexiest gun in the world.
Right.
I mean, it's your Honda Civic of
Yeah.
or your Toyota
I
Camry
was
of the
about to say
gun
Toyota
world.
Camry. Yes.
You know,
Absolutely. Yes.
yeah, like it's going to work. It's going to fire up. It's going to get you from point A to point B. It's not going to do it super fancy. It's just going to do the
Right.
thing. Well, okay,
Yes.
it's hard to go wrong with that choice.
Right.
Um, so anyway, I'm getting a little bit lost in the weeds here, but
No, I'm
so back
following.
to this, like, early on, the equipment almost doesn't matter because you're not good enough to make use of the equipment effectively anyway. But you do want
Right.
something that works reliably and is going to support your learning. So you advance your skill as quickly as possible.
Right.
The high level shooter, I'm going to the other end of the spectrum. It almost doesn't matter what they use because just about anything you put in their hands, they can put to good use. They can use effectively because they just have such a a a depth, a breadth, and a wealth of skill and experience, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, equipment, the gear doesn't matter so much because the skill basically negates any shortcomings in the gear to a point. Obviously, you can have, again, something that is so of such poor quality that that even the highest level shooter can't uh, depend upon it to save their life. In the middle range there, more in that middle portion of the distribution curve, that's where um, I think the nuance really kind of shines as far as that that's where the shooter they've already gotten to a certain point. They're pretty skilled. They kind of know what they're doing. And they're trying to get to the next level. And that middle plateau kind of region, you're going to spend some time there for sure,
Right.
because that's just the way it goes. That's where it probably makes sense to start kind of tinkering with things. So
Hmm.
you kind of need to be at a place where you you have pretty good, pretty solid skill and fundamentals in place. And at that point, that's where I'm like, okay, you want to start messing around, doing something different with your trigger or changing up, I don't know, mag releases and kind of customizing the gun more to you. That's
Right.
probably where it starts to make sense, a little bit more.
Yes.
But what's weird is a lot of times you see this kind of example I'm describing flipped on its head, especially on the lower skilled side of things, where people they go out and they buy a gun and they mostly buy it based off of looks and feel, like, oh, it feels good in my hand. They haven't even shot it yet. They're just like, it felt good in the hand, so that's the one. And then the very next thing is go to the Facebooks. Hey gang, what should I swap out first? Trigger, mag catch, sights? Should I put like they start like
Hmm.
immediately wanting to accessorize the thing. And it's like, no, spend some
Yes.
time with that first and go learn how to shoot it. And then maybe
Yes.
come back with that. I'm not gonna tell
Right.
people it's America. Like, I'm not gonna tell them what
Right.
like they can't do something with their gun. No, feel free. But if we're having a serious conversation about skill development and as it relates to equipment, um, I spent a long time with stock equipment, and probably honestly longer than I should have, um, because I remember a day. In fact, it first happened for me on an AR-15. I was competing in three gun, and did so for a couple of seasons with still using a standard mil spec trigger. And anybody knows a mil spec AR trigger is nothing special. I mean, it's fairly heavy, fairly stiff, not like you kind of have this wall. I mean, well, it's a wall right from the get go, and then
Hmm.
you're like, bang. You're like, oh, there it
Yes.
is.
Hmm.
I was running a standard mil spec trigger for a couple of seasons in three gun, and I was competing and holding my own against some pretty good shooters.
It's amazing.
And then one day I'm like, I see one of these fancy triggers for my AR. Oh man, $200. I'm not sure if the juice is worth the squeeze.
Right.
But I
Right.
was like, all right, $200, let's try it. And I
Yeah.
put that new, high-end trigger in, and it was like, it just it was actually, I just remember thinking, I'm like, wow, this is so much easier.
Yes,
And-
that's so
and-
funny.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like, clearly I was already really good with the standard grade equipment. But when you make your job easier and you have
Hmm.
some, and I'm not saying like I was the best shooter ever, and I'm still not the best shooter ever, trying to be, but when you're at a place where you're kind of good, there's a point where when you make the shooting part easier on yourself, yeah, it helps you realize this. Like what I would say it is that the skill is there already within you. It's just now the equipment's starting to hold you back a little bit, right? And so you
Yeah.
you kind of break those shackles off, and all of a sudden you're like, whew, and it just becomes so much easier. And so, not like you're going to suddenly turn into Jerry Mitchell like overnight just because you swapped out a trigger, but it certainly
Right.
is going to help when the skill is there to also back it up.
Right. That makes so much sense. And I feel like that principle applies to so many things. I mentioned to you before we started the episode, I just bought a new car, and I plan to do some off-roading with it. And I'm already thinking about what do I want to add first. And I'm thinking back to the first conversation I had with someone you know, who does off-roading all the time, and she told me, and you just reminded me to spend just a couple months with it first and see what I want to add, and don't just go crazy because it's so easy to get caught up and spend it's an expensive sport, and people say that all the time. almost like a joke, but it's the truth. It's so easy to
Oh
drop
yeah.
just thousands of dollars almost every month if you wanted to on new little specs here and there. So yeah, that's and people ask me sometimes, you're like sparking all these little memories of like they'll ask me about the specs on my gun, and every gun I own is pretty much stock. Yeah, except for, the optics I add, which I don't even know if that would I think you would still consider the gun
Mhm.
stock, right? Because you don't change
Yeah,
anything on it. Yeah,
I,
and
I I think
yeah.
so.
Yes,
The
it's
world's changed in
usually
that regard. Optics are
okay,
more of a standard issue equipment kind of thing, I would say now.
notice that. Yeah, and I mean, this might be a good time to kind of go into that. We talked a little bit about iron sights versus a red dot on our little mini MythBuster thing. I still haven't released it. I'm trying to come up with how I want to release those, but um,
Yeah,
so I know we talked about how does it particularly matter? And this, I think, goes along with what you've just said, but I'd love to hear more specifically about this. Does it really matter? Should it matter if you have irons versus a red dot when it comes to shooting skill? I've even heard recently in a class before you answer, um, I had someone say that they were so glad they switched to red dot because they sucked at irons, and it I kind of thought back to what we talked about. But what would you have to say to that?
yeah. Let me approach this a couple different ways.
Okay.
So the first thing is that whether it's an iron sight aiming system or an optics based one, uh, they're just mechanisms or systems by wherewith we are able to aim the gun or really confirm the aiming of the gun. It's the optic or the sight that tells me whether I've aimed well enough, given it the appropriate level of visual confirmation that because what are we ultimately trying to understand from that is the gun on the target or not?
Hmm.
That's all it is like sights or optic, a red dot, let's say, that it's just a tool to tell me when the gun is on target well enough for the shot that I'm trying to take. That's it. It's not more complicated than that. And so, how those are used, though, and how that's achieved, and how that visual information is interpreted is different based on the system that's being used. So we all know that a red dot. I look at the target. I should be focused or visually accommodated to, and my eyes converged on that aiming point on the target, and then I just bring that red dot to that place on the target. That's pretty simple. Irons, similar concept, but now I got to also pay attention to a front sight and a rear sight and whether those are also aligned to one another, more or less, with that now being also aligned with the target. So certainly an additional level of complexity, although there's ways to simplify it and ways to practice and train it. I think that help make it easier for the end user. So, but again, what it is I mean, we're just talking about ways of communicating to my eyes and my brain through visual information whether the gun's on the target well enough or not for the required shot. So I don't think of well, basically, here's how I would think of it. Anything I can do to enhance my ability to understand that visual information, that gun is on target acceptably or not, is probably a good thing. So now what's become popularized is right now is that red dots are where it's at, or optics, pistol mounted optics is where it's at. Well, that's certainly being shown to be the case just based on, market data. Um, Now it's becoming essentially accepted practice, certainly amongst the more serious users, certainly amongst those that are above a um, casual level. Like people are
Hmm.
like, yeah, put an optic on a pistol, like it's a thing. Like
Right.
how many guns you see in the gun store on the gun store shelves that already have an optic on it. Like you buy the gun and it comes with the optic. Like that is a thing now. Um, so it's easy to get into this line of thinking that Well, if you're not using an optic, if you're not using a red dot, there must be something wrong with you, or you're stuck back in the 20th century.
Right, right.
Um, I think my own experience could show that you can still absolutely be very effective with iron sights on a gun, uh, and that's going to remain to be true for I think a long, long time. Um, but does an optic, I think, simplify it? Yeah, I think it does, and I think for a lot of people, it makes a lot of sense. I think if I was starting out with a brand new shooter, I would start them with a simple to use, basic, reliable handgun with a pistol mounted optic on it. Because then what I've done is set them up to begin learning that gun, that learning the skill of shooting a handgun, where I've removed some of the complexity, and by that, the complexity of target, front sight, rear sight, and getting that all lined up and understanding what that information is telling them. It's much simpler to just be like, hey, look at the target. And when the red dot thing or green, as more and more are starting to use, when that's on there, you send the shot, you know?
Right.
That's simple. That removes, we talk about trying to get shooting to more of a place of automaticity or subconscious competence. Anything we can remove as roadblocks is going to be helpful in advancing that. And I think when you start people out learning on the optic, they just learn how to use it, and they don't have that difficult and sometimes awkward transition period that long-time iron sight users sometimes experience going over to the optic, and they're like, "Where's my dot? Where's my dot? Where's
Right.
my dot?" You know,
Yes,
and
yes.
so if you learn that from the get-go, that transition, if you will, there's not so much transition to that point, but just learning how to do that um, is, I think, a lot smoother for most people based on what I've witnessed. And I mean, I've witnessed that with my kids. And I think especially with like the younger generation that have come up on like video games and stuff, playing Call of Duty and, of course, back
Yeah.
in my generation, it was Halo, and
Oh,
Halo was
yeah.
freaking, awesome. And,
Yeah.
you put the dot thingy on the target and you send it, and
Yes,
like,
yes.
I think
Yes,
that
yeah.
clicks for a lot of folks that are familiar with that concept from like a gaming standpoint. Um, but
Yes.
what I learned through my experience going to USPSA production nationals a little more than a year ago was I went basically cold turkey, hadn't really shot irons, at least in a serious capacity, leading up to that point for a couple of years. And I'm like, I'm going to go shoot production nationals. Why? Well, because I want to. And so that meant putting down the optic gun for a while and picking up irons. And I had about a three 3 or 4 week transition period. And honestly, during that 3 or 4 week period, I was so busy teaching at training conferences and stuff, I didn't really get that much practice for myself.
Yeah.
Uh, so I pretty much just like, all right, let's pick up the iron sight gun, and here we go. And I remember going
Wow.
to nationals, and the curious thing was I kind of thought I would struggle a little bit with having to aim on irons again, and I think that some people do, uh, making the red dot to iron sight transition. Sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, trying to see those irons again. Um, I had spent some time, talking to my buddy Tim Herron and talking to, um, other trusted friends and folks in the industry, friends of mine that know how to shoot really good. And one thing I remember learning from Tim Herron a couple of years back was talks about anchoring the rear sight on the target, and I think the first time I heard it, I didn't quite understand what he meant, but this is what it means to me now.
Mhm.
The rear sight sits right directly above kind of the web portion of your hand. It's just slightly forward of your wrist. That rear sight, relative to everything else, doesn't really move that much. As long as your hand
Mhm.
isn't moving much, the rear sight's going to be right there, right above it.
Okay.
And so if I make sure I just get that rear sight on there, okay, no big deal, and then keep it
Mhm.
there. And then treat that rear sight like it's an optic window of sorts. It's an aperture, if you will, a window that
Mhm.
you're looking through And then I just target focus. This is what I do with iron sights. So I'm target focused, and then I'm just looking for that front sight, which I like to use like a fiber optic front sight, or at the very least, something that's bright enough or has enough contrast as a dot or something in that front sight that it's very apparent when it's there versus not, when it's meaning when it's there in that little box, which is my rear sight. So target focused, get that rear sight, that notch up on there, and then, oh, hey, there's that bright red or bright green fiber optic or that orange thing or whatever that high contrast front sight is. And when it's in the window, send it. Well, that's kind of like how you use a red dot. You look at the target, you aim at it, you bring the gun over there. That optic window is going to surround the target. It's kind of like your rear sight, and then you're going
Hmm.
to look for that red dot. So I just basically learned to use the iron sights as if it was a red dot. And it's not quite a perfect comparison in that way, but you'd be surprised how well it actually can work. And that's visually, it's how I perceive it as well. So I don't really I don't really think of it as being all that different now. I just go, rear notch window thing, rear sight, look for a bright, front sight thing in there and put that on the target and then send it. And then you just got to learn through a little bit of trial and error of just how perfectly you got to get that thing centered in that rear notch based on the relative size or difficulty of the target. And that's obviously where most people fail. It's like
Right.
that's ultimately the tricky part is, how perfect I got to get those irons. But approaching it in that manner simplified it greatly for me. Stopping cold turkey on the optics I've been shooting optics only for the most part for 5-ish years, and then going right to irons. That was my approach. That there was a lot of takeaways for me because of that approach and going through that process and shooting nationals in production division at that time. And because I think prior to that, I was sort of the attitude of optics are superior.
Hmm.
And I think that there's still a strong case to be made for that, but I don't think irons have to be as much of a handicap as what the popular opinions of the day would have you believe.
Absolutely. No, I truly appreciate that. Sounds like such a I feel like you just kind of cleared up that gray area really well, at least for me. So it's interesting you say that, and here I am stumbling again over my own words. But I recently started teaching basic pistol, and I had a student ask me this. I almost want to write her and be like, "Hey, so I've learned a little bit more." But she asked me, "Should I start on irons or should I start with a red dot?" And I told her I thought she should start with irons in a way because I thought that was almost like a the way you learn almost fundamentally, even though I understand site acquisition or target acquisition is a little bit different for both. So um in a way it's not doesn't have to be a precursor, and I'm just now kind of realizing that it makes total sense. I remember going from irons to red dot, and there is a big adjustment. It changes a lot about um well, at least for me at the time, because I just knew enough about irons that like I was kind of gripping onto that before I, shot a red dot for the first time. So I really appreciate that perspective. And I hope anyone listening who either is a new shooter themselves or has new shooters in their life that are going to them for advice. I sometimes think the people that listen to this podcast are probably the leaders in their communities anyway, whether that just be the person in their family that people go to for gun advice, or the people that are just the safety person when they go out, the one that carries pepper spray or first aid, or a combination of that and a gun. So yes, thank you so much for sharing that. It's very helpful to me as an instructor individual, and just um yeah, in general. So
Do you mind if I ask a quick question as a
go
follow
for
up
it.
to that?
Yes.
Because it's so common that people go, well, shouldn't you always start learning a pistol on irons first?
Hmm.
Because, like, that's the way I think people believe that's the natural progression of it, right?
Hmm. Right.
But I would ask the question, is that not maybe just a bias because that's the way we all did it,
Mhm.
right? And therefore, it's sort of like,
Absolutely.
I grew up learning how to drive a stick shift, a
I was
manual
about to say.
transmission car,
Yes.
and I still think there's a certain part of me that's like, woe is the current generation that will never understand how the nuances of accelerator and clutch and stick
Mhm.
shift and all of that. Like they
Yes.
should learn that. But that's
Right.
just the angry old boomer in me, old man yelling at cloud, because that's because like it was forced upon me, because like that actually had relevance back in you know the 1990s when I learned to drive, and
Right.
so so
That's yeah.
I think at some point down the road, we're going to be like, and I think it's already to some extent for a lot of people kind of there, but we're going to look back and be like, because this is how it is with rifles, right?
Right.
We look at an iron sighted only rifle as
Mm.
kind of antiquated, not really
Yes.
up with the modern times, and not particularly relevant. And we don't necessarily judge, an optic equipped rifle as being, if there's an argument against optics on a pistol, it's like, well, it could fail you in the moment, and
Mm.
so you got to know irons because you got to know what to do in case the optic fails.
Mhm.
Okay, to be fair, if you're running an optic equipped pistol, that optic certainly can stop working or become
Right.
obstructed or a glass break or who knows, something like that can
In there.
happen. That's
Yeah.
true. The quality of them is getting better all the time,
Yes.
but also there are other aiming, even if you didn't have backup irons, let's say, and I've done this in classes with students of mine. There are other ways of aiming that gun, even without your backup iron sights, and even when the optic isn't working. So, not all hope is lost. And I would say that, yeah, learning how to use an iron sight on a gun is still relevant. It's not hard. It's not a complicated concept. You put, stick looking thing in the middle of the fork looking thing and you line them up on the target. I mean, it's not rocket science. And just because I start somebody learning on a red dot doesn't mean at some point down the road when the grip and trigger pressing mechanics, the stuff that honestly is kind of hard to master, I can easily at that point be like, when they're not thinking, because this is the thing. Like, you take somebody that's already trying to just figure out, well, how do I hold the gun? Where do I
Mhm.
place this
Mhm.
hand? Where do I put that thumb? What part of my trigger finger interfaces with the trigger itself? Like, we want to get them past that point. We want them to be able to grip the gun properly, hold it steady enough without moving it off target as they learn how to press the trigger. And we need them to learn how to do that without thinking about it as soon as possible, because then everything else becomes easier. And so at that point, yeah, teach them irons too. But
Right.
if you want to start somebody on irons and then do the quote unquote natural progression from irons to
Mm.
optic, I I mean, certainly it can be done. And I'm not going to say that's wrong either.
Right.
Just saying I have a little bit of different approach now than what I used to have. But I also think that a lot of the current thinking on such things, especially in the instructor community, is probably more because of their own personally held
Mhm.
biases because of how they were brought up and how they had to do it, and not necessarily because one or the other is right or wrong. So again, at the end of the day, aiming a gun
Yes.
is just aiming a gun, and then they're just different tools for accomplishing that.
Absolutely. That was very well said. I like that. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because this big part of me wanted to be like, "Oh, yeah, red dot all the way." And then I was like, "Wait, no, that's my own experience liking red dots." But actually, um, me telling this, particular student that asked this question that she should start with irons is kind of also projecting my experience. I started with irons and then I moved to red dot. But yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm getting all these like flashbacks, and even just recently um my mom and I over a certain topic, it doesn't really matter what it is, but I've had to be like, mom, I really think that's a generational thing, my generation. And it kind of had to do with like working a certain amount of hours for pay, and I told her, like, my generation is getting more into the, like, we we kind of know our worth in the sense that, like, as long as the job gets done really well, it doesn't have to be a 40-hour week. It can be a 35, 30, like, not even counting hours, depending on the agreement you have with your work. That's totally
Sure, sure.
dependent on where you work. But
Yeah.
um she was like, you know what? That's a really good point. And I was like, yeah. So, like, while I would, like to be able to say, I spent 40 hours, it doesn't matter as long as I get the job done well. And she's like, yeah, that's a good point. So I definitely, it's easy for us to project our own experiences. And I like that this perspective is kind of opening that door to, like, another step before you tell someone something. Like, am I projecting my experience, or is this actually something that's sound? But I have definitely been doing a good job, I will say. The one thing I know I'm doing well is making all of my students um, be at least interested in cross-referencing everything I say, no matter what. There are,
That's good.
safety rules; those are always standard. But when it comes to advice on gear and shooting technique, like, not to think everything I'm saying is, the absolute end all. So,
Mm.
and that any teacher that gives absolutes, unless it's, something that's safety or something else, is absolutely questionable. So at least I've done that for that student that I told, the iron sight comment to, for
Yeah.
sure. So yeah.
Yeah. That's wise of you.
Oh, thanks.
I would even say now, as a asterisk at the bottom, the disclaimer to this episode is anything I've said in this episode should not be taken as gospel, even if I say it like it is.
Right. There you go. Okay, okay. And it's also a little bit of a way to protect yourself. I like, especially it's the Dunning-Kruger effect you mentioned, right?
Mhm.
Did I say that correctly?
Yep. Dunning
Dunning-Kruger?
Kruger. Yeah.
Okay. And for those that are not aware of what that is, I would love for you to explain it, because when I think about it all the time, it's kind of like my Roman Empire. It's always in my mind, until it's
Mm.
not. And then it's like, oh my God, that was there's the effect again. So I would love
Yeah.
for you to explain it if you don't mind.
Well, Dunning Kruger is simply, and I'm no like psychologist or
That's okay.
whatever, but
Yeah.
it's just it's the easy way to say it is the stuff. It's the you don't know what you don't know type attitude, and so what we often see is those with the least amount of skill and or knowledge often rate themselves as being better or more knowledgeable at the thing than what they actually are. And those that are on the other end of that spectrum, the higher skilled people, are usually the ones that underrate just how good or knowledgeable they are. And we see that with so many things. Like, I mean, you just do a simple study with American drivers. We've used driving as an example in this episode more than once now, and just ask drivers to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 of how skilled they are. By and large, most Americans will rate themselves higher than what they actually justify. Um, and so that's just classic Dunning-Kruger. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And that's the challenge. That's like where I was 10, 15, 20 years ago, was thinking, yeah, I know stuff about shooting because I grew up with guns. So, of course, I know stuff about shooting. I could teach people how to do this. I apologize to any of you I taught 10, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
because I guarantee you I taught you stuff that was not right or correct, or at the very least, wasn't the most efficient way of getting to where you desire skill wise. And so, but I think that's that's kind of true. I think of, like, we all had to start somewhere. So even when you look at the J.J. Rakazas and the Max Michels and the Niels
Hmm.
Jonassons and the Mike Seeklanders and the Rob
Hmm.
Lathams of the world, like, at one time they were not very good at the thing that they do now really good, and they probably would have
Right.
made the same mistakes. But the sooner that we realize this and understand our own limitations, and understand that there's so much that we don't know, the sooner we can break ourselves out of that it's a sort of cyclical way of thinking, because it becomes this reinforcement paradigm of of, oh, I know stuff, therefore I'm good, and then I share it with other people as though I know things, and that reinforce, and they're like, yeah, okay, that, just the fact that they listened to me and took me at my word, then makes me feel like I'm an expert again, and that's where you get stuck in that cycle where you never break out of that Dunning-Kruger effect. And so the sooner that you just come to terms with, I don't know everything, and I should question even the things that right now that I think I know. That's probably the big one, is questioning what you think you understand right here, right now. Because what that leads you on is a journey to intellectual honesty, and and if you just continually do that, and really what that is critical thinking at its heart, then you break yourself out of that cyclical nature of Dunning-Kruger type thinking, and you actually start learning and progressing.
Absolutely. That was very well explained. And especially from someone who's like lived through it as you stated before, I feel like that definition is easier to digest than maybe just
Mhm.
Googling it, Googling it. So I appreciate you explaining that.
Do you mind if I add one more thing?
Please do. Yes, of
And
course.
this is for you,
Oh, yes.
and
Okay.
for many others listening,
Okay.
because um, because what happens is, and I think you're already well past this. I think, um, when you break out of this Dunning Kruger way of thinking, and you start questioning what you think you know and what you understand, and you start looking for true answers, and you realize that there's all this vastness of knowledge in the thing that you're pursuing, that you don't know yet. At some point, you're going to find a lot of truth and a lot of answers, um, and you will become. I mean, it's hard to always sometimes say exactly where the point is. You cross the threshold into, now I'm an expert. And of course, nobody wants to be a self appointed expert. I understand that, and certainly can relate to that. But at some point, you're going to experience imposter syndrome,
Mm, mm-hmm.
where you probably are better at the thing that you think you are, and suddenly you are now, like, I remember one of the first times this happened, and I was in a room with a bunch of other people I really looked up to and respected, and was like, what am I doing here, and how did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm afraid to even speak,
Mm,
because what do I know compared to these guys and gals, that have been doing this a lot longer. Um, Imposter syndrome is real, and it will happen. I think almost no matter who you are and whatever, like as you are progressing in a particular field of study or pursuit, um, but you need to be aware of that as well. And and again, I think the key here is that we're always seeking intellectual honesty
mm,
with ourselves, because intellectual honesty in the beginning means understanding and recognizing you don't know a lot of stuff, and then intellectual honesty later in the journey is, you're going to be in a place where you don't give yourself credit for the things you do know and the experience you do have, and you're also not being intellectually honest with yourself because you fail to recognize your true wins and your true worth and the stuff that you actually do bring to the table. Both of those things are hard, but when you feel that for the first time, uh, what am I doing here? Who am
right.
I?
Yes.
Um, you need to fall back on, look at your journey and see where you came from, and see and recognize the evidences of the stuff of your true value and worth, and give yourself credit for it. And you need to have the courage to do that.
Absolutely. I'm just smiling really hard because I definitely feel like I needed to hear that. I really haven't. There was only one post recently where I posted something about concealed carrying or traveling with a gun on a plane. And I had put locks on my gun case that were not TSA approved. And I had a friend reach out to me and just let me know, like, hey, this isn't right, just so you know. And she did it so respectfully and so, um, and the best and just best possible manner. And before that, and honestly since then, I've doubted like everything I post, and that's why a lot of my content is not to make this all about me, but just relating to this right now in the sense that a lot of my content is my journey. I went to this class, here's my vlog, here's my experience. You can't argue with me because it's my experience. But I do have this draw to posting more informational and educational content, um, especially when I see someone post it totally wrong, like to the point where safety is not involved. And I think to myself, like, I could do a good job at explaining that concept or doing my own version of this. But it always comes down to feeling like an imposter. So I appreciate you bringing that up because it's almost the other side of the spectrum,
Hmm.
where you actually do know something you can share. And I've also learned that you can present information and always put a disclaimer that this isn't, the only way to go. I'm not an expert
Hmm.
on this matter and still contribute to someone's journey and lessen their confusion, demystify that process. So I'm really glad you brought that up, and I appreciate you sharing your own experience with that. I recently had an imposter feeling. I called Mike Seeglander and I was like,
Hmm.
"Hey, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start this series on live fire, and I wanted to get your opinion, get you to look over it." Um, and he basically said, "Sure, I'll look over it, but I don't really need to. Like, you've got this." And I was like, what was that? What'd you say? Did you mean to say that?" I was like, "There's no way he just said that." And he's like, "Yeah, like you've got this. Like you know what you're doing. I've seen the way you do this particular thing. You'll be able to convey that really well on the app." And so I yeah, that was definitely an imposter moment. I was like, "I'm still gonna send it to you if you don't mind looking it over." And he was like, "Sure, just send it over." So yes, I totally feel that way. Not that it's a class for USPSA or anything like that. It's a women's,
Yeah.
perspective for something. So but anyway, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I share it because, I mean, I've experienced it, and and kind of, when you start to put yourself out there and develop a following, and you're doing things like a podcast, and um, like naturally it's going to lead you to this place at some point. Like that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
I'll give you one other little, we'll call it a tip, if you will. I mean,
Please do.
and you kind of already just demonstrated that, and I think it's great that Mike handled it the way he did. Of course, he's I look up to him a lot, and I consider him, one of those people in the industry I look up to. Absolutely, 100%.
Wonderful.
Um,
Yeah.
Known him for a number of years now, and have trained with him, and
Amazing.
um, I mean, he is the consummate professional. I think, like the idealistic firearms instructor. Like the image I have of a firearms instructor, like the first thing that pops into my head would be an image of Mike Seeklander, because
Oh,
that's
that's
who he
awesome.
is as an instructor. Because
Okay.
he, of course, he's written literal books about the subject.
Yes, yes.
But anyway, no, but like the
Yeah.
other thing I was going to add here is that it's really great along the way. Number one, to develop. Well, earlier on, you want to find mentors,
Mm,
right, in your
mhm,
journey, as you're kind of leaving the Dunning Kruger stuff behind you,
mhm,
as you're
mhm.
advancing and you're growing and you're seeking truth. You want to find mentors, right? And I have a number of mentors in my life that have helped me get to where I am, in a variety of capacities, but especially in this space. And then also, you want to find some good, in some cases, those mentors end up almost becoming like peers, and that's kind of a weird thing. But also,
Yeah.
you want to like latch onto and make friends with other peers.
Mhm.
Um, and where I'm going with this is that you want to use that network. So there's definitely been times where I'm like, I'm going to post this thing, and I think I understand it well, and I think I'm on the right track here in sharing whatever thing I'm going to share, this post, this article, a video, podcast topic, whatever. But you know what? Why don't I hit up one of these people I consider, in my kind of close circle of this circle of trust, if you will, this community of peers and mentors and advisors, if you will, and just be like, and there might be one of those people that I know, oh, that's the person to ask to ask about this, because I know they have a lot of experience in that one thing, and be like, yo, Mike, I'm going to post a thing about whatever. And that's where they have that opportunity to be like, that's awesome. You're on yeah, that's exactly how I see it. That's how I think of it. You're on the right track. Do it. Or they might be like,
Yeah.
not quite right. You're missing something there. You need to study that a bit more, And
Yes.
so, and that's good to have, is that kind of network of that community of people around you that you can bounce things off of, and make sure that, number one, you're not Dunning-Krugering yourself, and number
Mm-hmm.
two, that that it also helps you as you overcome that tendency for imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. I like how you Dunning-Krugering yourself. I'll have to start using that. I like it. Yes,
Yeah.
that's totally true. Like, ask yourself where you are on that spectrum. Yes. I like it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna start adding that into my material prep. I think that would be um, a good step to add in at the beginning and the end almost. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, especially from someone as experienced as you. And I'll have to tell Mike to listen to this episode, just so he can hear that bit. I meet a lot of people who are fond of
We
him,
don't
and
need his head to get any bigger.
oh, you're right. You're right. You're totally right. I'm just kidding. You know what's crazy? I've met a lot of men in this industry, and there are some in particular. You're absolutely one of them that, I mean, I'd say like top five stand out as just, you're genuinely there to mentor, and especially as a female in the industry, not to get like too far into this, but um, I've absolutely, had my fair share of like, the whole like white knighting and
Mm.
just alternative intention, people, and those men that, come in and are just truly mentors, like they're there to encourage, support, and mentor, stand out to me. And Mike is absolutely one of them. Even aside from live fire, I've asked him about my own personal firearms instruction questions that have nothing to do with the app and our work, and he's been there to support. And it just really stands out to me. Like, you're absolutely right. He's an incredible guy. And not even the halo effect, where we see people who are good at one thing and we think they're amazing people in general. It's just, these are like
Yeah,
interactions I've held, and you absolutely stood out as that as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing about Mike. So that definitely reinforces those already kind of feelings I had. So very cool.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I would love to kind of dive in to your podcast and kind of highlight it, because you have such amazing I keep losing my train of thought, and then it's not like I keep flashing back to our that last part of our conversation. But you have so many great episodes out there already. I know She Shields just past episode 60, and probably only like 40 of those are worth listening to. But and I mean, like, before guest speakers, me just rambling with my old co-hosts and stuff. But you have so many episodes out right now, and I would love to hear kind of what all people can find on your podcast. Maybe who would be the ideal listener for your podcast, and honestly, anything you'd like to share about it.
I appreciate the opportunity, because I recognized earlier on, I was like, oh, I don't think I ever mentioned the podcast when I was doing my
I got
intro.
you.
So the Concealed Carry podcast is the one we launched. I think it was February of 2017. Yeah, and maybe it was 2016. Anyway, yeah, it was. It was
Around
2016.
then.
My goodness.
Okay.
Yeah. So wow, time flies.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
so
fair.
we
Yeah.
started the Concealed Carry podcast, and the big motivating thing there was, I actually kind of stole the whole concept of the podcast from another podcast that I was listening. I was real big on at the time, and someone I consider to be a friend in the photography space. I was
Mm,
really into photography back then. I mean, I still would say that I am, but I was kind of pursuing called a side gig at the time of basically being like a landscape photographer. So I listened to a lot
Wow.
of
Okay.
photography podcasts. And one of those that was helpful to me in the beginning was called, well, the website was improvephotography.com. Did they call it the Improve Photography Podcast? Anyway, um,
I'll find it.
yeah. And so I listened to that podcast, and Jim Harmer is the founder of that. He ended up selling the company in the podcast as well later on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I remember him talking once about one of the things he considered to be a secret of his success in like the businesses that he'd created, and including this one of improvephotography.com. And he said that I just set out the goal of making my website and my business, like the goal was to be incredibly helpful to my audience and to my customers. Like I just wanted to be incredibly helpful. Lay everything out there, provide all the resources, give them all the information, make it easy to find and access and all that. And he really excelled in that, and that's for sure. Because I mean, it was incredibly helpful to me in learning, landscape photography and other types of photography as well. So early on in this thing that Jacob Paulson, my business partner, now I never imagined 7.5, almost in December it'll be 8 years I've been doing this professionally full
Wow.
time.
That's
Um,
amazing.
you know, I never imagined I'd be where we are right now.
Hmm.
And just so yeah, I had to put myself in back there almost 8 years ago and being like what was my perspective at the time, and it was obviously very different. But I just remember thinking like that lesson was dwelling with me in my mind, and I was like, I want to try to be incredibly helpful to our audience.
Hmm.
And I just went to Jacob, was like, dude, we need to start a podcast. And he was like, why? And I was like, I don't know, because I just think it would be incredibly helpful and like a good idea. And the other piece too is I had already been searching because I was real big on listening to podcasts at the time. Um, I There wasn't a whole lot in the way of concealed carry focused podcasts or
Hmm.
podcasts that focused on that topic even. And so I also recognized the opportunity. I was like, dude, we get in on this early on, that's a
Hmm.
good thing. And so we did a couple of test episodes. I remember the very first thing we recorded, actually, I think I recorded it by myself. Jacob was like, that was painful to listen to. He's like, we got to redo that, And
I
so
get
we
that.
put,
I totally get that.
yeah, so we put together a game plan and a template, if you will, and kind of our strategy for how we were going to do the podcast. And so we kicked it off. So,
Amazing.
we've broadened the topic, things that we talk about, because I mean, 700 plus episodes of like always drilling on, concealed carry as a practice or as a lifestyle would, I mean, there's only so much you can probably talk about, or at least at the very least you get bored with it. So, um, you know, we talk about shooting and um, all kinds of self defense oriented skills, gear, equipment, um, I mean, just everything that we can think of, basically, and anything that I'm interested in talking about. But we try to still remain true to our roots in making sure we're focused, or generally speaking, around the concept of concealed carry, because it is the Concealed Carry podcast. Um, a couple things you can expect to find on the Concealed Carry podcast. Once per month, with some exceptions, but generally once per month, we try to plan an episode where we call it our Justified Saves episode.
Oh,
Justified
okay.
saves is our descriptor of it's what we call defensive gun uses. We kind of came
Oh,
up with that
okay.
idea from the company Safariland. That if
Hmm.
you can go to their, I think you can still go to the website today and find a page where they just list saves, and it started with them basically keeping track of how many lives, mostly law enforcement officers' lives, saved by them wearing Safariland body armor. And
Wow. Yeah.
so we're like, and I just like, dude, I think of these defensive gun uses. I mean, here's a couple of criteria. Number one, the individual using deadly force needs to they need to be like it needs to be done lawfully and properly and all that, right? Like
Right.
it's this is a justified instance of use of deadly force, and it's being done with the intent of saving lives, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so we call it the Justified Saves episode. So once per month, we basically, from the past month, we collect all these DGU stories and compile them and throw out the worst ones and try to keep the ones with the best lessons. And so then we spend the hour sharing these fairly recent, current event type instances of primarily civilians using deadly force to defend their lives and save lives, and then provide our analysis of that. So that's a fan favorite episode that we do each month on the Concealed Carry podcast. Then we typically do one per month that's focused more around news and industry related things, new products hitting the market. We also talk about legislative issues as well. So we do an episode a month that kind of covers more like the news side of things, industry news, if you will. And then
Mm.
we just try to also, the rest of the episodes, pick topics like it could be air travel with a firearm, how to do it, properly,
Mhm.
safely, legally, all that.
Mhm.
We've actually probably done that more than once now that I think about it.
Wonderful. Okay.
Could be, um, oh, I don't know, like we've got actually a couple of episodes that are also hugely popular. When we look at just total downloads for these episodes, we did a series that we just called Ultimate Concealed Carriers Beginner's Guide or something like that. It's the Ultimate Beginner's Guide for Concealed Carry. And I think we did 4 of those, and it was mainly
Okay.
focused around, hey, if we were looking back at what we know now, what are the things we'd want to know as beginners? That we wish known sooner. And so we ended up, doing 4 episodes in that series of just, you know, wish I knew this, wish I knew that, and then put them together and try to make that as helpful for beginners as possible. It might be something as simple as, the top 5 features you should look for in a concealment holster and, things of that nature. So we got a ton of episodes where the topic is something to do with that. Most recently, I had on the podcast Gabe New, who may not be, I mean, you may know Gabe, but probably not everybody does. But Gabe
I
is
don't
a
think so.
fantastic instructor out of Texas. Um, really passionate about the concealed carry lifestyle. I mean, he's very active in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and carrying a gun and practicing and all that. I mean, he's just a really smart guy and really truly believes in the lifestyle. And he and I talked about how good is good enough, just as a
Mm.
conceptual kind of, how do I know, I've arrived, like what am I striving
Mhm.
for as a concealed carrier? Most recently, I had Brian Eastridge on to talk about
Mm. Yeah.
revolvers and pocket carry. Um, those are I think the 2 most recent episodes. So that kind of gives you an idea of sometimes where we're at,
Right.
topic wise.
Oh my goodness. Yes. That all sounds incredible. I'm so excited to listen to more of them. I unfortunately, not to change the subject too, quickly, my favorite podcast genre is true crime,
Mm,
unfortunately. However, recently I've been traveling more and I don't always want to listen to stories about death, and music gets tiring after a certain point. So I'm really excited to dive more into your podcast. And I did not know you had a segment on like current statistics with saves and, or, talking about like, real life scenarios. Because I currently my For You page has kind of diminished the amount of posts I can see. And I don't know if it's because of the ongoing censorship or whatnot, but I kind of rely on TikTok and the pages that don't get censored for that kind of news. So I'm excited for that. And I'll follow up with you once I listen to that a bit more. Because I know we only recently met and everything, but um, podcasts are so important, and especially for people that travel a lot but like to learn as they're traveling. And um, I know I started it because it's something that everyone can kind of take part um, in a way, like no matter the age, most kids nowadays even have phones. And I know when I was young, I wish I'd had a podcast I could listen to about self-defense and like how to get started with that. And YouTube was still like not something I looked at a lot. So, but I did listen to podcasts. So Anyway, all of that to say, I think what you're doing is incredible, and I'm excited to explore it more. And I hope you, the listener, are interested. And if you are, head over to the show notes. They're right below the title of this episode, and I will link everything there, all of the links to the different places you can listen to the Concealed Carry podcast, so that you can check all this out for yourself. Um, so thank you for sharing that. Seriously, there's only so much She Shield has provided so far, so I'm excited to have now a resource to send people to, specifically a podcast. Um, so other than this, I'd love to kind of touch on. We met at the Guardian conference. I think I called it a summit earlier. The 2023 Guardian conference. I just want to say I've been to a lot of training recently, and this is nothing against the other places I've been, but I freaking loved it. I learned so much. I met so many incredible people. I didn't want to leave. I remember leaving and feeling sad that I'd have to wait a whole year to go again.
Hmm.
And which reminds me, we'll talk about this afterwards, but I completely forgot to sign up during. I have a list of things to do there, but I plan on being at the next one. It's not filled yet, is
We'd
it?
love to have you. No, it's not filled yet.
Okay. Whew. Okay. And for anyone wanting information on that, I will also link that in the show notes. Would you like to kind of describe what you all do at that, and share maybe your favorite part about it from this past one?
Yeah. We had talked about organizing an event like this for several years before we finally did it, which the first one was held in 2021. Um, so yeah, this last one was the third annual, and we are very much looking
Amazing.
forward to 2024 Guardian Conference. We wanted it to be, we wanted it to be that training experience that manifested everything else that we try to do through concealedcarry.com and our associated brands and the podcast and everything. And we wanted it to be concealed carry focused primarily, in other words, civilian self-defense oriented. And we came up with the name Guardian Conference because we've used the word guardian. For a long time, it was popular to call civilian kind of self-defense minded people sheepdogs, and we kind of felt like we didn't fully jive with that, and that's sort of that world has kind of come and gone. What do we call civilian, self-defenders, concealed carriers? Well, we're like guardians.
I like it.
Guardians of themselves, guardians of their families, guardians of their whatever's important to them. So the Guardian Conference is intended to be a 3-day training event that features obviously world-class talent instructors and that are teaching all sorts of topics. There's a lot of shooting classes going on, but it's
Hmm.
important to us that attendees also have the opportunity to attend classes focused around the legal aspects of concealed carry, uh, combatives, hand to hand. Like we had Paul Sharp. I know you're acquainted with Paul. This most recent one, teaching some kind of like
Hmm.
intro to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu type stuff, and also knife
Hmm.
defense, which I thought was really great. And we're going to look to expand upon that even more with Paul next year
Hmm.
because Paul's coming back because he's awesome.
Wonderful. Yes, he's
Uh,
great.
yeah, and so legal, hand to hand, combatives type work. We have Chuck Haggard always teach some OC
Hmm.
spray classes and
Hmm.
managing unknown contacts because those are important skills too. Also medical classes. We think that's critical, and we think actually some of those things, especially the medical, is well, it's hard to rate things over another thing. Managing unknown contacts is a pretty important skill too, but I have legit used life-saving medical intervention as a civilian multiple times over the years, usually in the context of a severe accident has occurred. Not always that I'm a part of, but that I came up upon a really bad one in Utah on a 2-lane highway several years ago. I had one just a little more than a year ago in Alabama on my way to teach a class in Alabama. Saw an
Wow.
accident happen right in front of me. A couple folks involved, and one of those individuals was, not the worst I'd seen, but definitely banged up pretty bad, and so
Right.
we have medical training classes, trauma classes at the
Absolutely.
Guardian Conference. So that's the idea, that's the vision, that's the concept of a well-rounded series of course blocks over 3 days taught by world-class talent, and that's what you can expect. So you can come away learning a lot, and it's all, I believe, useful to you, as a civilian or citizen-oriented, personal defense-minded individual.
Absolutely. And I agree as someone who attended. No, I loved it. And uh, it's hard to rank the importance of all of those different lessons between managing unknown contacts, pulling from concealment, grappling,
Yeah,
first aid. It's almost like you can't, they're all like, it's almost like a linear relationship. Um, I don't know if that makes sense. I may have not said that
yeah,
correctly, but whatever. Later, I might be like, damn, that sounded dumb. So I hope that's not the case. But anyway, no, it is really hard to kind of isolate those. So I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I will have all of that information linked. I even did a little mini vlog of it on my page. And I have the intention of going back and I'll do a longer vlog. I know that it was very last minute. I met um, uh, oh my God, why did his name? John Paul, sorry.
yep.
I was like, is it Paul or John? I was like, no, it's John Paul. Anyway, gosh, lovely individual. Met him at the USCCA conference, and his wife had followed me on TikTok. It's crazy how the world connects. But he
Hmm.
came over and he was like, "Are you fit for FIA?" I was like, "Yes, no way." Like he was like one of two people to recognize me from my Instagram, and I was like, "Hello, nice to meet you." Like, yes, I'm fit for FIA. So, met him, and he was like, "You know what? We're putting on this conference, and I was just honored to be invited. I got there, and it's so cool to see these everyday people come together and just be hungry for information. And it was also a beautiful setting. I know I'd forgotten where I've been traveling so much, but it was so nice to get outside and kind of disconnect from socials even a little bit. Just kind of like being out there and not being behind a computer and getting back to my roots. And it's just enough knowledge and lesson to like stimulate your curiosity and also give you a sense of just like a taste of reality that this is stuff that I know nothing about. I'm ready to learn more. Where can I go next? And you all provided that so well. You constantly reminded the attendees that, this is not an end all. This is just the beginning
Mhm.
to your lesson, which
Yeah.
I think it can be an oversight a lot when you take classes. It almost gives you this false sense of confidence, but you guys did a really good job at kind of equipping the attendees with that like realistic viewpoint. So thank you so much for letting me be part of that, and also for coming on the podcast. We've talked about quite a bit, but I just want to make sure before we end this, and that does not mean there can't be a part two in the future. I'd be honored to have you back on. Um, is there anything that you feel you would like to share with the listeners before we end the episode? Anything you didn't get to talk about that you're feeling particularly passionate about right now?
Well, I think I've been plenty long-winded for this episode
Yeah,
here today.
perfect.
Uh, I would just say, whoever you are, wherever you are, in whatever part of your journey, um, I think this has just been something that's proven true again and again in my own personal life, as far as just helping me get to where I am and blessing my life continually with, well, blessings. Um, that is every day. I get up, in the morning, and I just try to do something today that makes me better. You know, because life's complex. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of skills and things I got to do and take care of and maintain and responsibilities. But I figure if every day I set the goal to do something today that makes my life better, um, the end result ends up usually being pretty darn good. It doesn't mean that I figured it all out now, and it doesn't mean I'm not done, because that's the goal every day. Is we'll get up today. Tomorrow it'll be like, what am I going to do today that makes life better for me, for my family, for those I care about. And so that's in the context of whether your passion is shooting or personal defense or grappling or whatever, concealed carry, doesn't matter. Uh, whatever your passion is, or whatever it is that motivates you to brings you here to this podcast, to She Shield Pod. Um, just commit right now that tomorrow morning you're gonna get up and you're gonna do something tomorrow that makes your life better. And by the way, today is not too late either. You can still do something that
Right.
makes today
Yeah,
better too. So
exactly.
it could be like there's days that I'm like, I feel like I didn't really get a whole lot done today because
Mm,
life is life and it throws all kinds of things at you.
right.
Uh, it- I still got to look back and go, well, wait a minute. I did do whatever thing, and it was a small thing, but hey, it was a step in the right direction. Whatever, where I'm trying to get. Or even if it's the end of the day and it's like, man, today was just not a great day or not productive. Well, I can make the decision in the last 30 minutes that I'm awake before I go to bed or whatever. Maybe it's I pick up a book, an audiobook, a podcast, find something on YouTube. Like, YouTube's always controversial because you can waste a lot of time there, but
You
find something you've
can,
been
yes.
interested in learning about.
Mhm.
And, whatever it is, just the day's not done yet. And just do even the smallest, simplest thing that moves you in the direction that you're trying to go. And I can attest that works.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And that's such a good message from someone who has accomplished so much that your focus is just on the day to day. I feel like that kind of that message alone just doesn't get shared enough. So thank you for sharing that. It's a good reminder to me, and I hope whoever's listening feels encouraged. Um, so yeah, thank you so much, Riley. I'm excited to share this with the listeners, and on social we always have those highlights. So I'm excited for people to see you explain. And we're actually going to start releasing. I should probably have told you this before, but sure. You're good with it with what you do. The full video footage on YouTube that is starting to drop very soon. I also have to get over my fear of that being out there because I make such weird faces and then I drink coffee and then like when you like you're like, did I look weird when I did that? I'm gonna have to start just being okay with being uncomfortable there. But do you guys release full video footage
We sure
on
do.
YouTube? Okay. Did
Our
it
our
take you a second to start doing that or have you been doing that since the beginning?
Not since the beginning, and we've always
Okay.
said that our podcast is a podcast first and a video show
Okay.
second.
Okay.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
but our podcast is actually recorded live. So everything I do is on video and it's live, and there's no redos.
Okay. Whoa, that's awesome.
Although there are times though that I fix things in post for audio's
Right.
sake, because then what gets recorded live then gets edited and then pushed out on the podcast feed, the audio only side of the house. And we started that, like we started doing the live thing, not in the very beginning, but pretty early on, like maybe 100 and somewhere between 100 and 150 episodes in. We're like, oh, let's do this thing live with video all the time. So that's about when it started.
Oh, that's great.
And ours
No,
goes,
well,
it's instantaneous to YouTube and Facebook is what we do.
wonderful. Yes, I'll find all of those links and list them all out so the listeners can just go and click easily, decrease those levels of traction. But wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited for a part two. If there's ever a big topic kind of circling, I'll be sure to DM you and say like, hey, I want to hear your perspective on this if you're ever willing to come back. But
I am
um,
always game.
wonderful. Yay. Thank you so much. For those listening, like I said, everything is in the show notes, the notes below the title. If you're interested in exclusive content, you can become a Patreon. You'll receive a thank you note and podcast stickers along with more. You can visit She Shield on Instagram and TikTok for show updates, pictures of our guests, and podcast highlights. There's a very special thank you I want to give out to Sagetta Gear. They've sponsored us since the beginning. You can use code SheShield10 for all of your Sagetta gear, which is basically duty and concealed carry gear. One of my favorite belts by them is the Emissary belt. Moving on, if you like the podcast, you can very much help by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. So for Spotify, which is where I listen, all you have to do is scroll up, click those stars at the top, and give your honest review there. Hopefully it's 5, but We'll see. If you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis or leaving the country, leaving the state, and you want your guns put away from you, you can look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization that will connect you with the local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you until you are ready to get it back. The link to access their website and to find a storage location partner is also in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and in the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant.